as we welcome Dr. Maria Guajardo, who will conduct her lecture on dialogic learning and global citizenship education, exploring purpose and practice. This event is also an opportunity for us to be able to connect with friends and colleagues as we are able to tonight. And so we are so pleased to be joined by all of you. As I look around the screen, I see some familiar names and some familiar faces, and we would like to, of course, welcome all of you, but also Dr. Melanie Spence-Ariama, Vice Provost of the University of Guelph-Humber. Before we get into the events of the evening, I would like to introduce Dr. Paul Sherman, Program Head of the Community Social Services Program and the Director of the SERC-GC, to say a few words.
Thank you, Olivia. Good morning, afternoon, and evening to our colleagues and friends of the Soka Education Research Centre for Global Citizenship at the University of Guelph-Humber in Toronto, Canada. Once again, this year, our special lecture has generated broad international interest with over 200 registrants representing 22 different countries. We are so pleased to welcome Dr. Maria Guajardo to conduct our annual special lecture this year. Maria gave opening remarks at our International Educational Symposium this past March. Her presentation was so well received that we thought we'd invite her back to give this year's special lecture. Happily, she accepted. I recently returned from a visiting lecture appointment at Soka University, Japan, and had an opportunity to meet with Maria. I know she's very excited to share her thoughts with everyone on the important function of dialogue within global citizenship education. Now, before we hear from Maria, I would like to make a few remarks about SERC-GC, as well as the significance of having our special annual lecture at this time of year. Those of you who have attended our lecture in the past would have heard this already. However, it bears repeating for those attending this event for the first time. The mission of SERC-GC is to provide selected University of Guelph-Humber undergraduate students an opportunity to participate in scholarly activity that contributes to the local and international discourse on research into Soka, or value-creating education, and its practical application for educational and community settings. 93 years ago, on November 18th, 1930, Tsunesaburo Makaguchi and his young protege, Jose Toda, published the first writings that outlined the system of Soka. The word Soka was coined by Makaguchi and Toda and is a combination of the Chinese characters meaning create and value. Thereafter, the Soka Kyo Ikugakai, in English, the Society for Value-Creating Education, was formed and grew to a group of about 500 educators by the start of the Second World War. Makaguchi was an unpopular educational reformer with the Japanese government at the time. He strongly believed that the principal aim of education was to help each student reveal their individual potential to create value in life and to become happy. He once wrote, quote, "Other than happiness, there is no word that fully and accurately expresses the unhindered pursuit that is the objective of education," unquote. This rather contrarian view at that time did not go unnoticed by Japan's militaristic government. Promoting education for the happiness of their students, rather than as a vehicle for their subservience to the emperor, was not a favorable position for Makaguchi and Toda to promote. Subsequently, in July 1942, they were both arrested and imprisoned as thought criminals. Makaguchi died in prison at the age of 73, coincidentally on November 18th, 1944. Toda was released from prison when the war ended, and he reestablished the Soka Gakkai. His protege and successor, Daisaku Ikeda, founded the Soka education system with its aim to foster global citizens who could meaningfully contribute to society and to help strengthen the foundations of peace. To date, there are schools in 7 countries that infuse their curriculum with value-creating pedagogy based on the shared vision and principles of Makaguchi, Toda, and Ikeda. So this time of year is very special for enthusiasts of Soka education from all around the world, many of whom have joined us for today's lecture. I want to thank everyone for taking your precious time to attend this event and to learn from our very special guest, Dr. Maria Guajardo. With that, I will close my remarks and hand it back to Olivia to introduce our guest speaker. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul, very, very much. And so just to give an official welcome and introduction to Dr. Guajardo. Dr. Maria Guajardo is a professor of leadership studies at Soka University, Japan, where she previously served as dean and vice president. Her research is at the intersection of women, leadership, critical pedagogy, and globalization in higher education. Recent publications include Global Citizenship, Education, Teaching Strategies for a Gendered Perspective, and Engaged Pedagogy and Journaling, A Pathway to Self-Transformation. Dr. Guajardo is the recipient of the Soka University Award of Highest Honor and the University of Denver Lifetime Achievement Award. We are delighted to have you, Dr. Guajardo, and I will turn it over to you. And just a note to all of our attendees, we will have time for Q&A after Dr. Guajardo has finished her lecture. So over to you.
Thank you so much, Olivia, and to Paul and to the team at the Soka Education Research Centre. I appreciate the invitation, and I'm looking forward to being with all of you for the next hour or so. And so what I'd like to do, let me just change the view on my screen. So what I'd like to do is be able to have a dialogue with you. So what I want you to do is put your pen and paper down. I want you to take your fingers off the keyboard. I want you to just take a breath. Just join me right now on screen. I'm going to imagine that all of you are in the front seat, or all of you are seated in my living room with me, although my living room in Japan is tiny, 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 and you wouldn't all fit, but I'm going to imagine that you're all with me. Because what I'd like to do is just spend this maybe 30, 40 minutes, first just sharing with you some thoughts and reflections that I have gleaned from my experience, both as an educator, as a nonprofit leader, as a mother, as a friend. What does it mean to be in dialogue? And why am I so insistent that dialogue is not conversation? If nothing else, by the end of this lecture, I hope that is communicated and conveyed. How absolutely unique a transformational dialogue can be. So just let's practice listening. Let's just be with one another for this space. I promise that at the end of my lecture, quote unquote, I will show you a PowerPoint slide deck that is very short. For those of you that absolutely insist on seeing something on a slide, I will step in. I will share with you key points from the 3 sections of my talk. So take a breath and just wait for that if that's what you want. All right. And then more than anything else, I'm looking forward to the Q&A, the question and answer, the exchange of ideas and thoughts at the end. So I really want to be able to limit to a certain degree my own words so that I can bring you into the conversation. So with that, let me begin. So yes, as Paul shared and as Olivia also shared, the title is around dialogic learning and global citizenship education. So under the umbrella of dialogue, what I would like to do is share a little bit about my positionality. Who am I and what is it that I bring to this talk? I'd then like to move forward to explore both in terms of the process of dialogue, but more importantly, what is the purpose? What is the purpose of dialogue? And then how do we actually practice dialogue? And then the final third will be connecting this concept of dialogic learning, this experience, to global citizenship education. Where does it intersect? Where does it interface? Where are those common connections? And then for those of you that are going to wait for that PPT, then the slides will come. So that will come at the end. So first, a little bit about me. As I was introduced, you heard that I am here in Tokyo, Japan. It is Friday morning for me. It is, this is now my 10th year in Japan. Never anticipated that I would come to Japan, never anticipated that I would come to a country where I was illiterate, right? Because I don't speak Japanese, I can't read Japanese. Imagine what that does. And then put into context that experience with the concept of dialogue. All of a sudden, you're in a bubble where you can't have dialogue. So that really pushed me to move forward and to begin to think, how do we communicate? How do we express? How do we share? And what is the purpose of this work that we do as human beings? So as a professor, I walk into the room at the beginning of the semester, into a room with anywhere from 10 to 60 strangers. Imagine doing this. Imagine that this is your job. You walk into a room of strangers, and you know that you have been tasked with taking this group of strangers from point A to point Z. And during these 15 weeks, the expectation is that you will be able to, or at least my expectation is that I will be able to create a learning space that engages my students, that creates community, where relationships are developed, and that will become a transformational experience for all. Tall order for anybody, tall order for me. How do we go about doing this? And because I sincerely and deeply believe, down to the DNA in my body, that learning is relational and happens in community, not necessarily only in a classroom, but in groups, in our workspace, in our families. What I'd like to do is be able to bring in then a deeper understanding of dialogue and how dialogue can contribute to this transformational endeavor. I mean, there's nothing small about suggesting that dialogue can allow you to become more human. I mean, that is not a small endeavor. So let's think through, what does that mean? And how can we find a meaningful place for dialogue in learning spaces, however your learning space may be defined. So as I said, dialogue is a process of relationship building. Certainly you can have a dialogue, a monologue with yourself, but I want us to think about what happens when we sit with another person. I would suggest to you that dialogue is about discovery. It's about curiosity, and it's about allowing yourself to know what you know and what you don't know. What dialogue is not is coming to an exchange ready to convince the other person of what you believe. Now, you might say that that's a debate or that's a conversation. That is not a transformational dialogue. Paulo Freire has this great metaphor. He says, dialogue is not ping pong. You talk, I talk, you talk, I talk. That is not dialogue. He says that is an exchange. It is a transaction. And we're going to move from the thinking of transactional work to transformational work. Daisaku Ikeda and Paulo Freire both suggest that it's a process of becoming more human. And I very much appreciate Dr. Olivier Urbain's capturing of the definition of dialogue from Daisaku Ikeda's writings, where he says, it means bringing out the best in ourselves and others. So dialogue requires and necessitates change. And in order to change, we need to be prepared. We need to be prepared to be able to take this opportunity and to be purposeful or intentional about how we move it forward. So the purpose of dialogue is, in fact, to advance our understanding of ourselves and the other. The purpose of dialogue is to be able to transform this consciousness that each one of us has and wakes up with every morning. The sense of how we view the world. How I viewed the world in Denver, Colorado is different. It has evolved since 10 years ago to how I view the world now based in Tokyo, Japan. But it's a mindset, it's a global view that I have brought with me and that continues to evolve. The other thing about dialogue, because it is transformational, is that it challenges our passivity. So dialogue is not about being passive. It's not just about being receptive. Dialogue is in fact about transformation. It's about challenging the idea, okay, I've received new information. Now what do I do with it? What will I do with it personally? How will I extend myself to others? So it is absolutely anti-passivity. So dialogue, if you dialogue and you feel not compelled or propelled to do anything, I'm going to suggest maybe you were in conversation with someone. Now, don't get me wrong. It's not that conversations are bad, and I'm not passing judgment here. We need all kinds of exchanges of communication platforms and mediums. But I want us to begin to respect how significant transformative dialogue can be. So yesterday in class, I was teaching global leadership and dialogue, and a couple of my students from that class are on. So thank you so much for getting up early. And we were studying the lives of Nobel Peace laureates, and towards this goal of further exploration, I had the students engage in dialogue. Now, dialogue in my classroom is very structured. Everyone is asked to pick a partner. And in this case, I asked them to pick someone. They were mid-semester. I asked them to pick someone they had not had a conversation with or interacted with very deeply. I have a very structured way of organizing the seating arrangement. They pull away from tables. They each have a chair. The chairs face each other, but at a diagonal, almost with knees touching. My students from Laval University on the screen, you have done this. You know what this feels like. And right, you're nodding your head because you know I am very, very structured about this. I then designate one of the dyad members to be the speaker and the other to be the listener. And I give it a allotted amount of time. So yesterday, it was 5 minutes. Each individual had 5 minutes. And the question that was posed was, what is the role of love in peacemaking, peace building? What is the role of forgiveness? What about hate? I mean, we were finishing a text that we had studied for the first half of the semester. What I loved was after this 10-minute exchange, 5 minutes each. And during that time, the person who is listening cannot speak, interrupt, ask questions. So at the end of those 10 minutes, I asked, what was the experience like? It was only 10 minutes, remember, very short. And one of my students said, I learned more about the person in front of me. I know more about that human being than I know about people that I've known for years. And I probed a bit more, what makes the difference? And they began to talk about how when you feel safe, when you feel there is trust, this allows this space, this moment to open. Parker Palmer, another educator favorite of mine. I'm in love with many educators. He is one of them. So Parker Palmer at the age of 90 is still writing, is still talking, is still sharing. And he says, our job is not to break apart, it's to break open. And I would suggest to you that transformative dialogue is about breaking open and allowing something new to come in. So a central tenet of value creating education is in fact this practice of dialogue. And I feel that, I really respect everyone who's online today, because we are going a little deeper into what does this mean? What does this mean? How in fact can this deeper dialogue contribute to the happiness of human beings? Because many of our great scholars and peacemakers, Daisaku Ikeda, Paulo Freire, Parker Palmer, they talk about how this type of dialogue leads and contributes to the happiness of human beings. So let's move into that, recognizing the dialogue is complex. It's not simple, it's complex. It's dynamic, and it requires preparation. It requires an inner preparation. Daisaku Ikeda has a quote that I love. When I found this quote in his writings, it was spectacular. I feel like I need to get a calligrapher to put it somewhere for me, because it is, I hope you enjoy it as much as I do. Let me share just a part of this particular quote. He says, and this is with reference to dialogue and exchange, he says, it is only in the burning furnace of intense soul-bearing exchanges that our being is tempered and refined. Take a breath. No, seriously, take a breath. I can tell if you're breathing, so take a breath. All right, so let me just say that again. It is only in the burning furnace of intense soul-bearing exchanges that our being is tempered and refined. Imagine what that evokes and what that pulls out of us. He doesn't say dialogue is this generic exchange to build friends. No. He says it is intense. It is full body, full mind, full spirit engagement. And that the purpose, and this is what I love, the purpose is for our own growth, evolution, transformation. I love the choice of words to be tempered and refined. Now, who doesn't want to be a refined human being? I would ask. Right, so moving forward, dialogue, just to recap, builds community. It starts with that dyad exchange and it extends out. Dialogue allows you to connect to yourself at a deeper level, as well as connecting to another person. Dialogue gives voice to what matters to you, and you in turn make a deeper human connection with the person in front of you as a result of having this type of dialogic exchange. So this practice of constructivist listening, this practice of this dyad dialogue leading to transformation is an exercise, is an activity that I have done for decades now. And I began this work when I was doing much work in the United States on diversity, equity, and inclusion. And it amazes me that 20 years later, here we are once again in the work that we do, trying to connect to those that are different than us. For many different reasons, we are promoting diversity, equity, and inclusion in the workplace, in universities, in organizations. But in this particular instance, I remember pairing up this young Navajo man who must have been about 20 years old, a young man from indigenous, from the Navajo Nation, and he was paired up in a dyad dialogue with a middle-aged white woman. And they sat down and they put their chairs the way I asked them to. And each one had, I think, only 3 minutes to share. And at the end, I asked, how was it? How was the experience? And I'll never forget this young man turned to me and he said, I know that I live in the United States, but I've never talked to a white woman. This is my first time of being heard by someone. I felt that one experience dramatically and quickly, succinctly captured what is possible when we allow ourselves to listen, to understand to another human being. And this is why I ask one more time, do not confuse dialogue with conversation. I am not opposed to conversations. I am not opposed to many forms and processes and practices of communication. But let's take this concept of transformative dialogue, this practice of dialogic learning, and move it forward. Let's see what happens. So in the practice of dialogue, we have to build trust and we have to learn how to listen. So let's talk a little bit about what does that mean to build trust? So another quick little story. So a Japanese student from Soka University went to the United States for a semester, study abroad, came back, asked to speak with me. I didn't have him in any of my classes and I was a bit curious, and we sat down. He wanted to share what his experience had been like. But really what he wanted to do was talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion. And he said to me, when I went to the United States on my campus, I tried very, very diligently, very hard to engage in dialogue with Black people, with Latinos, with others that didn't look like me. And he said, but they didn't want to talk to me. They didn't want to have that conversation. And those words stuck with me for days. And I wondered, what is it? What was it? What was it? What happened? And I realized that for myself, if the person talking with me, if the person that is listening to me, if I can't trust that they will respect my words, even if they disagree, if I can't trust that they won't use my words against me, I will filter and I will censor and I will not share. So in this space of transformative dialogue, there must be trust. Trust that the other will not harm you with what you share. Trust that you will allow yourself to also listen that deeply. Trust that you may hear things that you don't agree with, and that you would be willing to hold that space of tension until something emerges. As Parker Palmer says, until something breaks open, not breaks apart. And that's the challenge as human beings. And in some cultures more than others, we are so risk adverse. We don't want to engage in conflict. We don't want to say the wrong thing. And so we step away, we censor, we filter. So I want to make sure that if you are my dialogue partner, that I can trust that you will listen to understand, and that your discomfort with what I might say isn't going to silence me. Again, in that space of tension, we may feel uncomfortable at what we're hearing. And for many of us, we have become code readers. Once we sense your discomfort, we stop. Once we sense your discomfort, we stop talking, because we don't want to break the harmony. We don't want to unsettle or disrupt the space. I love that Paul Sherman talked about Makaguchi being a disruptive educator. Well, what I love about that is that, and I feel like I'm the same so many days, I'm the disruptive educator, but what I love about that is that disruption allows for something new to emerge. But we have to allow ourselves to sit with that sense of disruptive words or messages, that tension, in order to be able to move forward. So I would suggest to you that trust is a change agent for being able to move through and deeply in dialogue. We also, as I suggested, have to trust ourselves and recognize that we don't have to be right. That for many of these topics, there is not a right answer. There is your perspective, and there has to be an honoring of what you want to share. We have to be able to honor, not just seek agreement. Too many times, dialogue is posed as seeking agreement. You agree with me, don't you? I don't think we can lead with that answer. I think we have to be asking, can I trust myself to say what matters to me? Do I feel safe enough? Versus, am I filtering my voice so that you will not feel uncomfortable with me? That's a very different approach to dialogue. And then I want to trust that you will listen to understand. Not listen to fix, not listen to remedy, but listen to understand. Listen with an open heart. So trust requires vulnerability. It requires, and this term has become very popular in the last decade, I would suggest. Brene Brown has put it to the forefront. It is in books, it is in podcasts, it is in TED Talks. But what does it really mean? I would suggest to you that we have to begin with ourselves as the role model of vulnerability in that safe and trusting space, in order for others to also then allow themselves to share with us. So this work is going to require inner preparation. Dialogic learning, transformative dialogue isn't just, okay, I'm ready, show up and talk to me. Transformative dialogue requires preparation. What kind of preparation? Well, inner preparation is how we phrase it. It requires that we train ourselves to listen. We train ourselves to hold tension, hold a space for tension. There is a dialogue between Daisaku Ikeda and Dr. Vincent Harding, and it is published in the book America Will Be. And there's a beautiful quote from one that I chose for today from Dr. Harding, where he says, "Our human differences are meant to draw us together in fascinating discovery, not to separate us in arrogance or fear." Right? So it means that preparation, that inner preparation, means tempering our own egos, tempering our own insecurities, so that we can, in fact, sit without judgment. It doesn't mean that you don't have your opinion. It just means that you will open up a space to allow someone to share with you. So to listen to understand means you suspend your questions. We have been trained by society so well. My students always say, "Oh, but it's so hard not to ask questions when they're talking to me." I know it is. But what if you give yourself permission to not ask questions, to not prepare a response, but in fact, to listen with your heart, to suspend judgment, to suspend those questions, and to make space for silence? What do most of us do in conversation or in dialogue when silence occurs? Some of us rush in to fill it up. Some of us begin to squirm like, what else should I say? And then we just babble almost. Don't be a babbler. We should have t-shirts that have that across the front. Don't babble. Just leave that space for silence in order to await what will emerge next. Yesterday, the students did this dialogue exercise, and in the debrief, one of my students said, "It was remarkable because I knew that you were watching and I knew that I shouldn't interrupt or ask questions. I just sat there and listened. And my partner 3 times stopped talking and said, I don't know what else to say. But within seconds would begin to talk again and go deeper." He said by the 3rd time, he just shared his heart. It was so moving. But that only occurred because this student did not interrupt, did not ask a question. And I will ask you the question, when we interrupt, what happens? What happens when we interrupt? Someone is sharing their story. We interject with a question. We're curious. We want to know more about a detail. Well, the moment we interrupt, their story becomes our story. It becomes the story we want to hear because of the question we posed. So interruptions alter the story, alter the narrative. What if you suspend your curiosity and allow yourself to listen, allow yourself to sit in silence in order to allow your partner's voice to emerge? So we want the story to be their story, not the story we want to hear. There was another dialogue book that was published between Daisaku Ikeda and Sarah Wider. And in this book, Professor Wider shares her reflections on what it means to have your narrative, to own your narrative. And this is the quote. She says, "There is nothing more powerful than stories in knitting us together and connecting us. Nothing more powerful than stories. It is really deep listening that is able to transform the other." That last sentence again. It is really deep listening that is able to transform the other. Sarah did not say, "It's being a great debater that allows you to transform the other." She did not say, "Fill in every empty space of silence." No. She said, "It is deep listening that allows you to transform the other." So this idea of transformative dialogue is relational, it's reciprocal. Change happens in both directions. So that's a bit about the purpose of dialogue, a little bit about the practice, but I also want to be able to ask, how do we connect dialogic learning to global citizenship education. How do the field of global citizenship education has expanded exponentially in the last 2 decades. There have been scholars, philosophers, theorists speaking about this concept. Some call it cosmopolitanism, some call it world citizenship. There are many different terms. And what I would suggest is that global citizenship education is the experience of allowing the local to go global and the global to become local. It is the experience of being able to see beyond yourself to others. And in making those connections, then, it will require that we heighten our consciousness in order to do better. And that's what Paulo Freire suggests. We must be able to heighten our consciousness of ourselves and of the other in order to take action, in order to do better. One of my other favorite human beings is the author Bell Hooks. And Bell Hooks passed away a couple of years ago, but she left volumes of writing. Feminist, one of the most brilliant thought leaders that I have had an opportunity to read. And Bell Hooks says, she challenges to ask this question. When it comes to conversation, dialogue, she challenges us by asking the question, who speaks? In dialogue, who speaks? And she's suggesting that it's not equal, and that because of power differentials, some voices continually are missing. Right? So she's not suggesting in the one-on-one dialogue, although it applies there. But I think it's, when we talk about global citizenship education, I think it's important to ask the question, who is speaking for global citizenship education? Whose voice is missing when we address this global mindset? And who is being silenced? Who is being silenced? Ambassador Chowdhury, who has engaged, I'm sharing a lot of dialogue books because they, to me, are like a wealth of knowledge. So Ambassador Chowdhury participated in a dialogue exchange with Daisaku Ikeda. The published work is called A Culture of Peace. And he says, when you silence 50% of the population on the planet, you cannot achieve globalization. You cannot achieve sustainability. And he's speaking about women specifically. If women are silenced, we will not be able to engage in deep and meaningful global citizenship, the practice of global citizenship. So back to Bell Hooks, I think it merits us asking, who speaks? Whose voice is missing? And who is silenced? And to personalize this, my question to you would be, when are you silenced? When do you feel silenced? When do you feel like your voice has not been heard? Dialogic learning leading to transformative dialogue at times will not allow us to speak for others. It can't be true dialogic learning if we're speaking for others. So not only do we not interrupt, but we also don't do this trick of, oh, this is what she meant to say. Well, instead of rephrasing, why don't you ask, what was it that they meant to say? Right? How do we allow for that voice to come in? So dialogic learning within the context of global citizenship education is in fact learning how to listen. Dialogic learning is about allowing tensions to emerge in order for something new to break open. And the third part, and the final part that I would share with you now, is to ask us all to stop for a moment and to consider, what is the role of reflection in the work of dialogue? So I said you have to be able to trust. That means creating a safe environment, trusting yourself. We have to be able to listen to the other, listen to understand. And we have to be able to create a space for reflection. What did I learn and how do I make new meaning? This is where new knowledge is created. When you allow yourself to make new meaning out of that dialogic experience, making meaning of new ways of knowing and being. So take a breath. No one's breathing. You're not breathing. Take a breath. I can tell you're breathing when your shoulders go up and down. I can tell you're breathing when you smile. Now people are breathing. All right. So why don't we go to the slides? Why don't we take just a quick recap of some of the key points? So to begin, and this is where I started, dialogue as a process is relational. It is what we do with another. Yes, we can have that self-dialogue, and that's very important. But right now, I want us to focus on that transformative experience of engaging with another. And as Paulo Freire suggests, and Dr. Hardy, it engages this process of discovering, of discovering not only the other, but more of yourself. And in this work, we must allow ourselves to be transformational. And this is the work that allows us to become more human. So dialogue is the process of becoming human. It's the process of being able to connect with what matters to us and to extend ourselves to others. In the next slide, we see if we can advance the slide, thank you. Dialogue is also a process of critical consciousness that challenges passivity, right? We're not having dialogue for the sake of saying, well, I've had 20 dialogues today, I'm tired. We're having dialogue to say, in that moment of reflection, how did that touch me? How am I thinking about this? How am I feeling about this? And then how do I show up differently? So dialogue is a process of critical consciousness, challenging passivity. It's about taking action. Next slide. Dialogue, I would suggest to you, and Daisaku Ikeda would suggest to you, brings out the best in ourselves and in others. And so while this proposition of being vulnerable, this proposition of opening up yourself, I mean, please be judicious about how it's done. But if the context is such that you feel safe, that you are working on trust and feel that it's a trusting space, then allow yourself to come forward. And that change is a better you, and you become the catalyst for the better other as well. And in the next slide is the quote from Daisaku Ikeda, where he says, "It is only in the burning furnace of intense soul-bearing exchanges that our being is tempered and refined." So what can we do? How can we intentionally and purposefully create opportunities for this intense soul-bearing exchange with the proposition that I want to be better, I want to do better? Next. So it is a practice. Dialogue is a process, is a practice. It's not a word that we can just toss around flippantly and say, well, again, I had dialogue today. There's been too many instances where I have been in company of others, where I have heard leaders, individuals in leadership positions say, well, we had a dialogue with the students. And I begin to reflect and I think, no, that wasn't a dialogue. You gave them a few minutes to share their perspective, and then you told them what to do. That is different. That is different. That is instructional. That is directive. We have to think that dialogue requires trust. It's this opportunity to allow oneself to be vulnerable, but it's conditional. It's conditional. It means that I have to feel safe enough that what I share with you will be respected, honored. You may disagree, and there may be tension, and it may make you feel uncomfortable. And I have to trust that you will be okay with that. And we have to prepare in order to step into dialogic relationships. We have to practice listening. And yes, as I said to a student yesterday, she asked, I'm the listener, does that mean I can't talk? I said, yes, that means you cannot talk during your time. It's this very simple concept, but very complicated, because we are trained as societal human beings to voice questions, to interrupt. So I would ask you, listen to understand, allow for the silence to be present, listen with your heart, and suspend questions even when that moment of silence opens up. Just wait. Wait. And then this is the quote from Vincent Harding. Our human differences are meant to draw us together in discovery, not to separate us in arrogance or fear. This is the possibilities of transformative dialogue. And then to close, the last slide, as we begin to consider and position dialogue within global citizenship education, which at face value implies that we are reaching beyond our smaller communities and connecting, interfacing with other communities. But I would challenge us to follow Bell Hooks's lead when she asks, who gets to speak? Who gets to speak? And who is silenced? And the final question, to always look around and ask, whose voice is missing? And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Olivia to be able to have a little bit of exchange with all of you. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Maria, for such an insightful and informative and engaging conversation. And I am very much looking forward now to open up the floor to anyone who has any questions. Now, you are welcome to raise your hand or put your question in the chat, and I will get to as many as I can.
Maybe, perhaps I can start off. Thank you so much, Maria, for that presentation. It's very refreshing. It just I really like the concept of transformational dialogue, but I just think, you know, these days with so much division in the world and people just seem entrenched in their own points of view and unwilling to accept other people's points of view. I'm generalizing, of course, but how do you encourage someone who just will not accept another person's point of view? They're right, the other person's wrong, or everybody's wrong, they're right. How do you encourage them to engage in transformational dialogue?
I would actually turn that question around a bit, Paul, because the challenge is, how do I encourage myself to remain engaged with someone whose views are so oppositional to my own? I happened to fly into Los Angeles one time. I had a car waiting for me, a driver. It's one of those wonderful experiences where you see your name on a little card and you think, oh, that's me, they're here to pick me up. And so off I go. This individual was a retired military person, late 70s, doing some driving just to be active. And this was a number of years ago. President Trump had just been elected. And as we took off for this drive that was going to be about 90 minutes, he said, "Wasn't that speech last night just presidential?" And I had been on the flight, so I had missed the speech. But part of me knew very quickly that I probably would not have described the speech if I had heard it as presidential. I just knew myself, I know my own political views. And so I just thought, And so I had to decide in that nanosecond, how do I engage him? Or do I just put my earphones on or pretend I'm asleep? Right, here is someone that I did not anticipate meeting that has very quickly shared with me in just a couple of sentences that we probably see the world very differently. And everything in my body after a 10-hour flight just wanted to close my eyes and say no. But then I remembered, Maria, you can't, I talked to myself and I say, Maria, you can't go around talking about transformational dialogue if you're not willing to engage with people that are very different than you. And so I allowed myself and I encouraged him to continue to share. And he did. And he continued to share. And then I would, after he would stop, he'd ask me what I thought, and I'd share a perspective. I tried to share questions that would draw out a bit more clarification. And for 90 minutes, we talked. By the end of the drive, I learned about how he was actually doing this part-time job to have enough money to pay for his great-nephew's medical bills, that he was taking care of other neighborhood children, that this was all happening. And I just connected to him as a human being. I didn't connect to him as someone who represented a political party. I connected to him as a human being. When we exited the car, he took my suitcase out and he looked at me. He said, "Young lady, that was the best conversation I've ever had. That was a great drive." And I thought, well, first of all, thank you for calling me young. And second, yes, it was. I agreed with him. Right. So I think, Paul, sometimes we spend a lot of time identifying all the people we don't tolerate, agree with, or have different views. We can identify them quickly. But my question would be, how often do I place myself in a position to listen? And again, listening does not mean that I agree, but listening might break open into something else. My job isn't to change the people that differ from me. That's not my job. It's sort of like when all of you were young and dating, some of you are still young and dating, but a lot of us weren't quite at that spot. But when we were young and dating, right, I remember thinking, this boyfriend, I'm going to fix him. Yeah, a few dates with me and I'm going to make him better. Right. Dating should not be like this, polish the other human being into becoming that's not our job, right? But somehow my little brain thought that was what dating was about. Take someone who wasn't perfect and make them a little better. Dialogue should not be like this concept of dating. Well, let me have a dialogue to fix you. That's not what I want to do. I want to really polish myself to be able to hold a space that is difficult, that makes me squirm, to see if I can recognize the humanity in that other human being. That's why it's not easy. But thank you for that question.
Thank you so much. And I see a hand over here from Claudia. Go ahead.
Hola María, ¿cómo estás? Hi everyone. Don't know exactly how to put up this question, but I've been in Canada for the last 3 years, and I came from Mexico. I studied in Mexico diversity, equity, and inclusion. And one of the things that I found out here is that it's a beautiful idea. It's a bad reality. And now that you are bringing out this conversation, and when you talk about being a disruptive educator, for me, what I have found out is that educators at this moment in this life in Canada, they cannot be disrupted educators without losing their jobs, without being suspended, without being persecuted, and some of them have even committed suicide. So how, I mean, I love the idea of, you know, President Ikeda is my sensei, and I've been practicing Buddhism for a very long time. And but it has been very challenging to apply this idea when by law the educators are being prosecuted for thinking different, or to challenge the students to think different. So how do we deal with this situation without putting at risk the job? Even for the kids, my son was severely damaged for saying the wrong thing. Well, or he was innocent for saying something, and you know, and in this exercise of reflection, it was like, how do you accept that you were guilty over saying something without considering other people's feeling, culture, religion, all of that? No, it was a very tough exercise, and I end up saying no, but always with the fear that probably I would be, suspended, prosecuted, or something like that. So how have you been, your experience with this situation?
Claudia, thank you so much. Thank you so much for that question. And as you were speaking, what I sensed was, the recognition that there are environments that are toxic. There are policies that are damaging. And I recognize that, and I hear you loud and clear. And it's hurtful. It's challenging. It pushes us to want to protect. And in those moments, Claudia, what I would suggest to you, I can only suggest to you what my approach has been. It has been to really double down on recognizing, naming, what are my values? What is it that I believe in? This is separate from saying, oh, this is what I'll put in the curriculum, or this is what I'm going to go protest on, or this is, no. This is inner work. What do I believe? What are those values, and what are my non-negotiables? Where do I draw the line and say, no, this is unacceptable. This is not going to work, right? Because if you violate this non-negotiable, then I will leave. So in doing this work, Claudia, what I have learned is that what's most important is how I show up, right? Sometimes even without words, how do I show up? How can those that are around me sense, understand, begin to identify, that's who Maria is like, right? Because I think that this building of bridges, which is what I believe global citizenship education is, it's the work of value creating education. Building these bridges sounds simple, is very complex, especially as you described the environment. It's a culture of fear that is emerging in different pockets of the world. It's a culture of fear, given the conflict that is going on in the world. Israel, Palestine, now in different sectors, now there's fear. You don't want to say the wrong thing. You don't want to inadvertently express your own views and then be harmed. I understand that. And so the question is, Claudia, as you were sharing, how do we show up in a culture of fear? How do we show up when it could bring harm to us? And I would say, well, I don't know every single circumstance or instance. I would say it has to start with being very clear about how you want to live your life, what you believe in, and what your non-negotiables are. So that I may not know the person on the street, they may not know my views, but when I interact with them, my humanity will be the first thing that emerges. It's not easy, and I don't pretend it to be. But sometimes we have to step into a space that is totally unfamiliar and redefine it for ourselves, right? Toxic cultures, toxic policies come and go. I'm old enough to know that. And my strategy then is, how do I want to show up? How do I want to engage? Because the push may come from the left today, but it may come from the right tomorrow. Right? So my question is then, what do I stand for? What do I believe? And how do I live those values day in and day out? Being very intentional to not want to draw harm, but also being very clear that at some point, there are multiple ways to be able to engage. Confrontation probably isn't the best way in this circumstance with your son. What are other ways, alternate ways, to continue to have self-respect for yourself, for him, and to be able to show up, right? Because I can tell you want to be a change agent. You want to be able to contribute. We have to be smarter than the problem. And I believe we can be. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Such a great question. So I'm going to go over to the chat. And then Michelle, I do see your hand, so I will get to you shortly. So question in the chat from Maheen is, thank you so much, Maria. I would like to ask a question about what can we, the public and civilians, do to help foster a dialogue for peace between national political leaders in light of conflict?
I believe everything is local. I believe everything is personal. And I believe it starts with us. And yes, we want our efforts to be amplified. We want our contribution to peace, as you're suggesting here, Maine. We want our efforts to be amplified and to have greater impact. We don't want to be patient. We want to be able to see change now. I get that. I also know that, and this is something that I say to my students all the time, if we can't create that environment in this classroom, what makes you believe you're going to create it out there? Within our families. I'm not sure about all of you on the screen, but I would ask you, how many of you have peace in your family? Where everybody's talking to each other? Holidays are coming up and everyone knows how we're all going to spend time together, right? Or is it, well, if Aunt Susie comes, I'm not going. I'm not going to show up. Or I haven't talked to my younger brother for 2 years and they didn't like, or they left me unread. I love this one. They left me unread on social media. So I'm not talking to them right now. I'm sorry, but am I the only one? Right? Look at Heather laughing. I know this is true, right? This is our lives. So while I absolutely believe that we have to hold that greater vision for peace, for nonviolence, at least that's true for me, I need to start with the person closest to me. When was the last time you snapped at someone? Was it fair? Was it valid? Was it because they didn't let you talk? They didn't pick up their socks? They forgot to throw out the trash? What was it? Right? We're human beings. And I think I want to be able to recognize that, again, this work, I sound like a broken record now, but the work comes back to me. What am I doing? And how then? Because how then can I extend that to others? When I can refine myself, temper myself, temper meaning shape myself to be that contributive person that I want to be. Then the ripple effects are there. We may not see the difference immediately, but I honestly trust that the ripple effects happen. So we want to be able to reach out to national political leaders. I think there's many platforms where you could safely share your perspective, your opinion. And I think those are all legitimate, but at the same time, even more importantly, what are you doing? to create peace within those that are closest to you. Have you reached out to everyone, or do you have someone on the list of not talking right now? This is very real. It gets down to the simple things. If I can practice doing that, I will get better at doing the public peace. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, and Michelle, who has been so patient, you are welcome to ask your question.
Thank you so much. And Maria, I feel really happy to finally meet you. I've heard you speak in other situations and was really hoping someday to talk to you directly. So here we are. Reflections are just a mile a minute when you're speaking. I have so many things to ask. So I have to narrow it down. Let me explain an anecdote first. There is a United Nations affiliated think tank called UNRISD, UNRISD, which I think stands for United Nations Research Institute for Social Development. They're based in Geneva. They are financially independent of the UN, even though they're connected to the UN, which allows them to be quite independent in the reports that they publish about inequality, for example. And I found them by accident because I happened to be at a conference in Geneva, and I met the communications director. And thanks to her, I was able to participate in a Zoom about 2 months ago where the former president of Costa Rica, Mr. Quesada, was the keynote speaker. I don't know if you know who this man is, but for me, he reminded me of another Gorbachev, but this time coming from Latin America, a person with a totally global mindset, a humanist, a pacifist, who talked about the fact that his country has no army. It's probably one of the only ones, right, in the world that decided not to have military presence for decades and decades. And for this reason, they're flourishing culturally, and their health system, and they don't have a lot of problems that a lot of other countries. I was born in Washington, D.C. and grew up in the United States. But I was in Japan for 7 years. And during that time, Gorbachev was on the world scene. And as we know, Daisaku Ikeda and Gorbachev had the most amazing dialogues and talked about authentic dialogue. And I guess what I'm telling all this to you because Mr. Quesada kept talking about we can't make a new world if we don't learn to have dialogue with everyone at the table, and vertically and horizontally, we have to get everybody involved. And some people would say, well, that's quite unrealistic, but in fact, that's what he's been doing. And so he's been recognized in Europe, in Boston, in various places for his achievements. And so, because I've been on a personal quest of what is authentic dialogue, in my association, which was created in Paris in 2018, we sometimes have events that are related to, searching for what is authentic dialogue. And I have the same concerns as some of the other people that have just spoken about how looking at the world scene, how can we help when 2 nuclear powers are saying, well, I can't talk to this guy, the other power, because he won't accept what I'm going to say. So there's a prioris, so thank you very much for coming back to this point of, it starts with us. It always starts with us. And it does seem to me that, well, I guess my question is not at all clear. I'm reaching out because I wanted to share what I'm discovering about South America, which seems to be coming up in the world. And maybe one more thing, which will help you figure out how you're going to respond to this very unclear talk that I'm having here all by myself, is something else that's helping me in my reflections about dialogue and trying to figure out how to apply it to me and my association, is the discovery of Jan Oberg, who also had a dialogue with Daisaku Ikeda quite some years ago. Do you happen to know Mr. Oberg? No? I found out about him by chance because there was SGI Malaysia had published something related to an essay that Daisaku Ikeda had written about his meeting with Jan Oberg and his wife Christine. Jan, I think, is from Denmark or Norway. Now he's in Sweden. But in any case, he is a conflict resolution type person. He's a peace researcher, peace activist for many, many years. And he was already present on the ground before, during, and after the Balkan, the horrible tragedies and bombardments and NATO terrible stuff. You know, you've got the Serbs and we have the Muslims and the non-Muslims and the massacres and the bombs and everything. And he was on the ground trying to help the people who've already lost family members, helping them to connect with themselves and with each other. So I'm not sure. I'm really not sure where I'm going with all this, but just to let you know that.
Let me just stop you there then. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So as you were speaking, Michelle, I really tried to listen. And of the different narrative, of the different points in your narrative, what came out from me was this idea of how some of us have the privilege to look away, right? This idea, and it's been very top of mind for me as you describe these different conflicts, as you describe different alternate approaches. It's almost like it wears us down after a while, and we choose not to look anymore. Repeatedly, I have heard from people, I don't do the news anymore. I just don't want to hear any more bad, right? And I suggested to my students for 1 week, I said, because we all have privilege. I said, you know what? Let's park our privilege outside of the door for 1 week. And let's step into this space of tension and learn what you can about conflict. But do it, mindfully. Don't just go and read everything, because everything is not equal, but don't keep looking away. Find a way for you to connect with the tension, the discomfort, the horror of what is currently happening on the planet. And then ask yourself, where do I stand on this? What do I want to do right now? Back to Maine's question, if we want to have impact nationally or internationally, I think we have to start with not even knowing, it's not about sides. And that was another question that came recently. Well, I don't want to take sides, so I can't talk to anybody about conflict. And I said to them, it's not about taking sides. It's about owning what you believe, your values, your non-negotiables, and bringing them to the table. And your values, your non-negotiables, who you are, will set the stage for how others react to you. You don't have to pick sides. You can say, my values are A, B, and C, and this feels intolerable. No one can judge you for that. They are your values. It's what you believe. So, Michelle, I think that as you were speaking, that was the connection that I made. it reminds me that conflicts have always happened, will continue to happen, and we are experiencing them at large right now. What privilege do I have to look away?
May I just rebound 2 seconds?
2 seconds, Michelle.
Okay, it won't work.
All right.
I will
But thank you
write
for your
you.
question.
I will write you. Thank you so much.
Yep.
Thank you so much. And I think we have time for maybe one more question, which is here in the chat from Ghazal. Do you ever find having a dialogue and creating safe space for others leaving you exhausted?
Isn't that a great question? It is a great question. When I am fortunate enough to be in these spaces, and I would suggest to myself that my opportunity to be with young people, because that is my life, to be in the spaces of young people who share their thoughts, who share questions, dilemmas, conflicts, fears, that coming out of those, actually, it's not exhaustion. I feel so connected to my heart. And that moment, that space, I treasure. Because, I mean, it even tears me up now. The opportunity to be able to connect to someone at that level, to be able to see them reveal themselves, to be witness, to bear witness. Elie Wiesel talks about this, Nobel Peace Laureate, right? The job of many of us is to bear witness to the tragedy, the trauma, the pain, the hurt. So I think our work at times is to bear witness to what is happening to others. And in this process, allowing space for us and them to heal. It's about becoming whole again, WHOLE, becoming whole again. And so creating those safe spaces, exhaustion isn't the word. I feel very full. And I recognize how blessed I've been to have been able to see someone's heart, the tear, the broken, the hurt, and to see it then begin to become whole. I also recognize at the same time that this work means that I have to constantly be doing the inner preparation that I spoke of earlier. And that inner preparation means I need to find ways for myself to be whole. I need to find ways to be whole. So my question to you is, what do you do? What do you do? Some of us just look away and don't want to engage. Some of us say, I'm going to engage, but it's going to wear me down a bit. So again, what do you do to become whole? Do you hold the hand of a loved one? Do you joke with your 26-year-old who makes you laugh nonstop? Do you cook? Do you just take a walk? Do you hold that little girl in your arms like Anna is doing and say, yeah, I don't know if this is how you become whole, but that's the question. How do we become whole? Ask yourself. There's nothing small about that question. Thank you all so much. Thank you. Thank you for sharing. Thank you. Love to all of you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Guajardo. On behalf of Dr. Sherman, the Soka Education Research Centre on Global Citizenship, and just everyone joining us today, I would like to thank you from the bottom of my heart for such an illuminating discussion and conversation. You know, I'm one of the fortunate ones who's had the pleasure of sitting in on one of Dr. Guajardo's classes, and hearing you share your stories and just sort of the energy and everything that you brought to today. It just sort of brought me right back to that class and was a reminder of why I was so moved then and am moved this evening as well. I truly want to thank you for sharing your experience and your knowledge and for sharing your stories and truly for providing a deeper meaning and understanding of the concept of dialogue. As you've said, dialogue builds community, it fosters deep connection, it gives voice, and it's transformative. And it truly is quite fitting to hear you reflect on the true meaning of dialogue, because the dialogue that you led for us today was not only transformative, but it brought all of us, a group of people from different places and time zones and different backgrounds together to really think and reflect and to ponder as a community. And so from all of us, I would like to thank you so very much for doing that for us.
My pleasure.
It truly was a pleasure. And before we close off, I would just like to make one exciting announcement that the Soka Education Research Centre on Global Citizenship, we will be hosting our 3rd annual International Educational Symposium in March. I believe it'll be March 22nd, Eastern Standard Time. So details to follow, so you can expect to receive communication from us. And once again, thank you to all of you for taking the time. It truly was a pleasure. And we hope to see you in March and next year for our special lecture. So thank you all so much.
Thank you. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you. Thank you very much.
Thank
Thank
you
you very
all.
much. Thank you.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank
Maria.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Much. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, Maria. Oh, you know which book I love by President Ikeda? The one that with Arnold Toynbee, Choose Life. I think is my favorite.
Thank you, Maria. Thank you.
Olivia, you were amazing. Thank you so much. I just have a quick question about, do we get access to the recording of the session?
Yes, this is Paul. Yeah, we're going to put the recording on the SERC-GC website. I think you probably have the link for that. Just Google SERC-GC and give us about a week to get it up there.
That's great. This is my first session, so I have no idea about it. So thank you for letting me know. I appreciate that.
Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Closing off now.
Thank you.
Bye.